The silence in the hearth hall was the first sign of rot. It was a thick, choking thing born of fear. In the center of that silence was Rory, the beta son, a predator circling his prey. The prey was Naim, a young Omega girl whose only crime was a spilled flagon of ale. Her terrified whimpers were like blood in the water, and the pack watched, their inaction a poison that sickened the very air I breathed. My wolf, the one I kept hidden beneath a quiet surface, refused to let it stand. "Leave her," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the silence like a blade. Rory turned, his face a mask of disbelief that quickly curdled into pure venom. He stalked towards me, his eyes raking over my simple clothes, dismissing me in an instant. "And who are you?" he sneered, spittle flecking to his lips. "Some stray bitch with a death wish?" I didn't answer. I simply stood my ground, shielding the terrified girl behind me. That was when his hand flew. White-hot fire exploded on my cheek. The sound was a whip crack, a bone-deep violation that shattered the last of the hall's honor. The silence that followed was a living thing, a horrified collective gasp that no one dared to voice. I didn't fall. I didn't even cry out. I just met his furious gaze, and the look in my eyes was a cold, silent promise of retribution. Then the world ended. The great oak doors didn't swing open, they exploded inwards, torn from their hinges by a force of pure, uncompromising rage. The temperature in the hall plummeted. Alpha Declan stood in the doorway, a storm of fury given human form. His gaze bypassed everyone, a heat-seeking missile locking onto a single target, the blazing red handprint marring my face. The gold in his eyes bled away, replaced by an abyss. And from that abyss, a low, guttural growl began to build, a sound that was not just a threat, but a promise of an entire world being torn apart.
Chapter 1. The growl that tore from Declan's chest was not a sound of this world. It was a promise of annihilation, a primal tremor that shook the very hearthstones of the Great Hall. The pack, which had been frozen in a state of horrified shock, was now paralyzed by a far more potent force, the absolute, unrestrained fury of their alpha. He moved not with the explosive speed of a warrior, but with the slow, deliberate, and terrifying grace of an executioner. The temperature in the hall continued to drop, and frost began to spiderweb across the window panes, a physical manifestation of his rage. His eyes, now bottomless pits of black, were fixed solely on me. He walked past the cowering pack members as if they were ghosts. He walked past the beta, Rory's father, whose face had gone ashen with a dawning, sickening understanding. He walked past Rory himself, who was trembling, his arrogant sneer having melted away to reveal the terrified boy beneath. He ignored them all, his entire world narrowing to the space I occupied. He stopped just before me, the sheer force of his presence a physical shield. The air around us grew still and quiet, and I in the center of a raging hurricane. He didn't speak. He simply lifted a hand, his movements impossibly gentle, and his calloused thumb traced the angry red mark on my cheek. The touch was not one of pity, but of a profound, soul-deep ownership. It was a silent vow, a brand of possession that seared itself onto my very spirit. In his eyes, I saw 1,000 years of primal fury held back by a thread. And in that moment, I was not afraid of him. I was terrified for the man who had dared to harm what was his. He held my gaze for a heartbeat longer, a silent communication passing between us that the rest of the pack could not comprehend. Then the moment shattered. He dropped his hand and turned, his body coiling with a lethal tension. The full, apocalyptic weight of his attention finally fell upon the beta sun. The air grew thin, charged with the ozone of the impending storm. "Rory?" Declan's voice was a low, chilling whisper that carried to every corner of the now silent hall. It was a sound more terrifying than any roar.
Chapter 2. Rory stumbled forward, his arrogant swagger gone, replaced by the shuffling, panicked gait of a cornered animal. Every eye in the hearth hall was fixed on him, 100 pairs of silent accusers. He looked desperately towards his father, the beta Liam, his face a mask of pleading terror. He had built his entire life on the foundation of his father's power, and now he was looking for that power to save him. The beta, a powerful gray-templed wolf who had stood by Declan's side for years, took a hesitant step forward. His face was a battlefield of paternal instinct and political dread. "Alpha," Liam began, his voice a low, placating rumble. "My son has committed a grave offense. His disrespect is a stain upon us all. But he is young, arrogant. He did not know who she was." He gestured towards me, a desperate attempt to frame the crime as a mistake of identity, not intent. He is the future of this pack's leadership, perhaps a lesson in humility, a period of service. He was trying to negotiate. He was trying to turn this moment of high treason into a political matter, a problem to be managed. Declan didn't even turn his head. The abyss in his eyes remained fixed on Rory, but his next words were blade aimed directly at the beta's heart. "He laid his hand on what is mine," Declan whispered. The sound of venomous promise that coiled around the hall. "He did it in the heart of my hall, in front of my entire pack. He did it because he believed his rank gave him the right to be cruel." The temperature in the room dropped another 10 degrees. "You taught him that. You taught him that power is a weapon to be used against the weak." A collective gasp rippled through the pack. This was no longer about Rory. This was about the rot he represented. The alpha was not just pruning a branch, he was laying his axe at the root of the tree. I stood there, my cheeks still burning, my own heart a frantic bird in my chest. I had wanted justice for Neve, but this was an unraveling. I could feel the sheer unrestrained power pouring from Declan in waves, a force of nature so potent it made my own hidden wolf tremble in a mixture of awe and terror. This was the man I had bound myself to, and I was only just beginning to understand the storm that raged beneath his controlled surface. Declan finally looked at his beta, and the cold fury in his gaze made the powerful man physically recoil. "Your son's lesson will not be in humility," the alpha stated, his voice chillingly final. He turned his attention back to the trembling Rory. "It will be in consequences." He gave a sharp, definitive nod to his 2 personal guards who had materialized at his side. "Take him to the stones."
Chapter 3. A collective, horrified intake of breath was the only sound that answered Declan's command. Then a pathetic, strangled cry tore from Rory's throat as the 2 guards seized him, their grips like iron manacles on his arms. The beta son, who had been a swaggering lord of the hall just moments before, was now a sniveling, thrashing mess. He kicked and pleaded, his eyes wild with a terror that was bone-deep and absolute. "Father, please," he screamed, his gaze locking on the beta. "Don't let him do this." Liam, the beta, did not move. He seemed to have aged a decade in the last 10 minutes. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a gray, hollow mask of a man. His power, his influence, was nothing in the face of the alpha's primal fury. He had no words, no power to save his own son. He simply stood there, a broken statue, a testament to the consequences Declan had promised. A cold knot of unease tightened in my stomach. I had wanted Rory stopped. I had wanted him punished. But this felt different. This wasn't justice. It felt like the prelude to a sacrifice. The pack's terror was a living thing, a scent of ozone and fear that was almost suffocating. Declan turned his back on the scene,
dismissing the fate of his beta son as if it were a matter already concluded. He walked back to me, his presence a shield that blocked out the rest of the world. He gently took my arm, his touch a possessive brand, and guided me towards the great shattered doors. "You will stand with me," he murmured, his voice a low, possessive command meant only for me. "They will all see who was wrong today. They will all bear witness." My mind raced. The stones? What were they? I glanced down at Neve, the young Omega, who was still huddled behind me, her eyes wide with a terror that was almost reverent. "What are the stones?" I whispered. She looked up at me, her voice a trembling thread of sound. "They are the judgment stones, my Luna," she breathed, the title feeling alien on her lips. "From the old law, it is where a wolf's rank is unmade before the eyes of the pack. He will be stripped of everything. He will be nothing." My blood ran cold. This was a fate worse than a beating, a punishment that would scar the soul. Declan led me from the hearth hall, his hand a firm, guiding pressure on the small of my back. The entire pack followed in a silent, grim procession, a river of shame and fear flowing towards the reckoning.
Chapter 4. The walk from the hearth hall was a funeral procession for a man still living. No one spoke. The only sounds were the crunch of 100 pairs of boots on the gravel path and the pathetic, choked sobs of the beta's son being dragged between his guards. Declan led me, his hand a firm, possessive brand on the small of my back, his pace unhurried and absolute. He was a king leading his people to a public execution, and I, his unwilling queen, was to be the guest of honor. The path ended in a wide, circular clearing on a wind-swept hill. The grass was short and gray, and the air was thin and cold. In the center of the clearing stood the judgment stones. They were 3 towering monoliths of black granite, ancient and scarred with runes that seemed to drink the light from the perpetually overcast sky. They were arranged in a tight triangle, forming a small, sacred space that felt older than the pack itself. This was a place of raw power, of old magic, a place where laws were not just enforced, but carved into the very soul of the land. The pack formed a silent, perfect circle around the clearing, their faces a mixture of grim fascination and stark terror. They were not just witnesses, they were participants, their collective presence giving weight and finality to the judgment. Declan guided me to a spot directly opposite the entrance, placing me before the largest of the 3 stones. He stood at my side, a formidable wall of power, positioning me so that every single member of the pack had a clear, unobstructed view of my face, of the still burning mark on my cheek. The guards shoved Rory into the center of the triangle of stones. He collapsed onto the cold earth, a broken, weeping mess. All his arrogance, all his cruelty had been stripped away, leaving behind only a terrified, pathetic boy. He looked up at his father, the beta, who stood at the edge of the circle, his face a mask of stone, his eyes hollow. No help would come. I felt a pang of something cold in my stomach. This was too much. This was a breaking. Declan's voice, cold and clear as the winter wind, cut through the silence, addressing the circle. "We are here to enforce the old law," he declared, his voice ringing with an authority that was absolute. "The charge is treason. The crime is the striking of a Luna." He paused, letting the weight of the words sink in before turning his abysmal gaze upon the sobbing figure on the ground. "Rory of the House of Liam, son of my beta, your sentence is unmaking."
Chapter 5. Unmaking. The word was a death knell, a sentence so absolute it seemed to suck the very air from the clearing. Rory let out a high, keening wail, a sound of pure, soul-deep despair. This was a fate worse than death. To die a wolf of the pack was an honorable end. To be unmade was to have your very existence erased, your spirit cast out into a void from which there was no return. Declan stepped into the triangle of stones, his presence so immense he seemed to block out the gray sky. He walked towards the broken figure of the beta sun, his movements slow and ceremonial. As he passed each of the great monoliths, the ancient runes carved into their surfaces began to glow with a faint, sickly silver light. A low humming sound filled the air, a vibration that resonated not in the ears, but deep in the bones. This was the old magic awakening. This was real. I watched, my heart a cold stone in my chest. I wanted justice. I wanted a lesson taught. But this was an obliteration. My gaze drifted across the silent circle of wolves and landed on Neve, the young Omega I had shielded. She was huddled close to her mother, her face pale, her eyes wide, not with triumph, but with a profound, horrified pity. She was not seeing justice. She was witnessing a slaughter. And in that moment, I understood. This was not for her. This was not for me. This was for him. This was for the primal, wounded pride of the alpha whose mate had been struck. This was a king making an example, using a sledgehammer to kill a fly. Declan stood over Rory now. He raised his hand, not to strike, but to perform the final act of the ritual. The silver light from the runes intensified, coalescing around his fingerkeeps. He was about to sever the spiritual tether that bound Rory to his pack, to his family, to his very wolf. He would leave him a hollow, nameless thing, a ghost to wander the edges of their world forever. And my own wolf, the quiet, hidden part of me, screamed in protest. This was not leadership. This was tyranny. This was the same abuse of power Rory himself had been guilty of, just on a grander, more terrifying scale. My purpose here, my reason for being his mate, his Luna, was not to stand by and endorse his cruelty. It was to be his balance, his heart. Declan's hand began to descend. The pack held its collective breath. And in that final, terrifying second, I found my voice. Stop! The word was not a shout. It was a quiet, firm command, spoken with the same calm authority I had used in the hearth hall, but in the charged, magical silence of the clearing, it was a thunderclap. Every head, including Declan's, snapped towards me. He froze, his hand hovering just inches from Rory's head, and his abysmal black eyes, filled with the promise of annihilation, locked onto mine.
Chapter 6. The silver light from the runes flickered, the low hum of the stones faltering as if in response to my command. Declan remained frozen, a statue of impending violence, his hand hovering over the beta's sun. His head turned towards me with an agonizing slowness, and the abyss in his eyes, which had been focused on Rory, now fixed on me. A low, dangerous growl rumbled in his chest, a sound of pure, frustrated fury. It was the sound of a storm being denied its landfall, of a lightning bolt being forced back into the clouds. The pack watched, their terror shifting into sheer, unadulterated disbelief. I had not just challenged the alpha, I had interrupted the old law itself. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my feet were steady. I took a step forward, and then another, breaking the sacred circle of witnesses and walking onto the cold, hallowed ground within the triangle of the stones. I stopped just a few feet from him, a quiet, immovable object meeting an unstoppable force. "You asked me to stand with you," I said, my voice clear and unwavering in the unnatural silence, "not to stand by and watch you become the very thing you claim to despise." His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek. "He struck you," Declan snarled, the words a guttural baseline of his rage. It was the only fact that mattered in his world. He dishonored you. He dishonored me. "And you will make a monster of yourself to prove a point?" I shot back, my voice gaining strength. "Look at them, Declan." I gestured to the pack, to the pale, terrified face of Neve. "You are teaching them fear, not respect. You are showing them that the answer to one act of violence is a greater, more terrible violence. An alpha protects the pack. He does not break its children for the sake of his own pride." Every word was a stone thrown into a still, dark pool, the ripples spreading through the horrified pack. I was speaking a truth no one had ever dared to voice. For a long, heart-stopping moment, I thought he would strike me. The power rolling off him was a physical thing, a promise of annihilation. His eyes were black holes, threatening to swallow me whole. He held my gaze, a silent, furious war raging within him. The primal wolf, wounded and demanding blood, was at war with the alpha who was being confronted by his Luna. Finally, with a snarl of pure, frustrated agony, he pulled back his hand from Rory. The silver light of the runes died, plunging the clearing back into the gloomy twilight. He had stopped, but this was not over. He stalked towards me, his face a mask of cold, controlled fury. He grabbed my arm, his grip not painful, but as unyielding as the granite stones around us. "The judgment is stayed," he bit out, his voice a low growl for my ears only, a promise of a reckoning to come. He turned, pulling me with him, and walked away from the stones, leaving a broken boy, a shamed beta, and a stunned, silent pack in our wake.
Chapter 7. The walk back from the Judgment Stones was a silent war. Declan's grip on my arm was a manacle of bruised pride and barely contained fury. The pack parted for us like a river around a boulder, their faces a mixture of awe and terror. They were staring at me, the stray who had stared into the abyss of the alpha's rage and had not been consumed. I didn't feel powerful. I felt like I had just pulled the pin from a grenade and was now forced to hold it. He didn't lead me back to the hearth hall. Instead, he dragged me up a steep, winding path towards a solitary structure built into the highest point of the ridge, the Alpha's Tor. It was a fortress of dark stone and ancient timber, a place of stark, lonely power that looked down on the entire territory. This was his heart, his den, and I was being taken there not as a mate, but as a prisoner. He shoved me through the heavy oak door, the scent of old leather, wood smoke, and the clean, sharp scent of him overwhelming me. The space was magnificent and utterly empty of warmth. A single, massive fireplace stood cold and dark. Furs were thrown over stone benches. It wasn't a home. It was a lair. He released my arm and began to pace, a caged storm of muscle and fury. "You humiliated me," he snarled, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "You stood before my pack, before my beta, and you stripped me of my authority." "Your authority?" I shot back, my own anger flaring to meet his. "You are about to perform a ritual of soul-breaking on a boy. That isn't authority, Declan. That's tyranny. And I will not be the excuse you use to terrorize your own people." He stopped, whirling on me, his eyes once again bleeding to that terrifying, abyssal black. He stalked towards me, backing me up against the cold, unyielding stone of the fireplace. "You put his hands on you," he roared, the sound of physical blow that shook the very foundations of the Tor. "He hurt you. I felt it. The moment he struck you, I felt it a mile away, a blade in my own gut. My wolf demanded his life. The old law demanded his soul. And you defended him." I flinched at the raw, agonizing pain in his voice. This wasn't about his pride as an alpha. This was about his pain as a mate. "I didn't defend him," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I was protecting you. From yourself." He slammed his hand against the stone wall just beside my head, the impact echoing like a gunshot. He leaned in, his face inches from mine, his breath hot and ragged. The rage in his eyes was warring with a deep, desperate vulnerability.
You have no idea what you've done, he growled, his voice a raw, broken thing. You stood in the path of my wrath? You think you can challenge my law? He leaned closer still, his lips almost brushing mine, the scent of his fury and his want a dizzying, intoxicating thing. You are my law now, Fiona, and I have no idea what to do with you.
Chapter 8. The air between us was a live wire, thick with the scent of his rage and the dizzying, unspoken want. His body caged mine against the cold stone, the heat of him a stark, burning contrast. I could feel the frantic, primal beat of his heart echoing my own. I braced myself for another roar, for a continuation of the verbal assault, for him to shake me, to do something to release the violent storm trapped within him. But he didn't. Instead, his gaze dropped to my lips, and the abyss in his eyes was suddenly lit by a dangerous, possessive fire. You challenge me, he rasped, his voice a low, guttural sound of pure, agonized conflict. You defy my law. You stand in the path of my justice. Every instinct I have screams to punish you for this defiance. He leaned closer still, his forehead resting against mine, his breath a hot caress on my skin. But my wolf only wants to claim you. And then he did. The kiss was not gentle. It was a clash of thunder and lightning, a desperate, brutal claiming. It was the full, unrestrained force of his rage, his pain, and his century of loneliness crushing into me. His lips were hard, demanding, a continuation of our argument without words. He was trying to dominate me, to overwhelm me, to force me into submission with the sheer force of his will. But my own hidden wolf, the one I had just begun to understand, refused to cower. I didn't just endure the kiss, I met it. I answered his fierce, punishing passion with the strength of my own, my hands coming up to tangle in his hair, pulling him closer. This wasn't a surrender, it was a battle. A declaration that I would not be broken, that I was his equal in this wild, terrifying dance. The moment my strength met his, something shattered. The punishing force of his kiss gentled, the raw anger dissolving into a wave of pure, soul-deep need. The storm broke. The desperate, possessive claiming softened into a kiss of profound, aching reverence. It was as if my defiance was the one thing that could finally soothe the beast within him. He pulled back, his breath coming in ragged, shuddering gasps. The black fury was gone from his eyes, replaced by a raw, stunned vulnerability. He looked at me, truly looked at me, as if for the very first time, he wasn't seeing a challenge to his rule anymore. He was seeing his other half. The strength of the alpha is the pack, he whispered, his voice hoarse with a dawning, world-altering realization. He gently traced the fading mark on my cheek, his touch now a whisper of awe. But the strength of the pack is the heart of its Luna.
Chapter 9. The echo of his words, a quiet admission of a world-altering truth, hung in the air between us. The fire of our conflict had burned away, leaving behind the fragile, glowing embers of a new understanding. He pulled back completely, the space between us now charged not with anger, but with a raw, uncertain reverence. He looked at me as if I were a map to a country he had never known existed, a land of balance and mercy that stood in stark contrast to his own world of brutal, uncompromising law. But the passion of the last few minutes hadn't erased the problem that had brought us here. The fate of a boy, the honor of a pack, and the very definition of justice still hung in the balance. "Declan," I began, my voice quiet but firm, pulling him back from the precipice of his revelation. "Rory, what happens now?" His jaw tightened, the hard mask of the alpha sliding partially back into place. "He will still be punished," he growled, the instinct for retribution still a powerful current within him. "My pack must see that there are consequences." "And they will," I agreed, taking a careful step closer, not in challenge, but in partnership. "But the consequences you intended would have taught them only fear. Show them a different kind of strength, a different kind of justice." I saw the skepticism in his eyes and pressed on, my own certainty a new solid weight within me. "Don't unmake him. Remake him. Let his punishment be to learn the value of those he considers worthless." He stared at me as if I were a map to a country he had never known existed, a land of balance and mercy that stood in stark contrast to his own world of brutal, uncompromising law. But the passion of the last few minutes hadn't erased the problem that had brought us here. The fate of a boy, the honor of a pack, and the very definition of justice still hung in the balance. "This is your justice, my Luna," he said, his voice a low, rumbling vow. He took my hand, his large, warm fingers lacing through mine. "Let the pack see their queen's heart."
Chapter 10. We walked back into the hearth hall, hand in hand. The pack, who had been waiting in a state of tense, silent dread, stared as one. They had seen me dragged away by a furious alpha. They now saw me return at his side, an equal, our fingers laced together in a silent declaration of unity. The shift in power was a palpable thing, a current crackled through the charged air. Rory was huddled on a bench, guarded by the two sentinels, his face tear-streaked and vacant. His father, the beta Liam, stood a few feet away, a statue of impotent shame. Declan led me not to a seat, but to the center of the hall, directly before the great roaring hearth that was its heart. He did not release my hand. He turned to face his people, his voice no longer the whisper of rage, but the clear, ringing command of a king. "The judgment of the stones has been stayed," he announced. A collective, audible sigh of relief and shock swept through the hall. He let the murmur settle before continuing, his gaze sweeping over every face. "The old law is a weapon of last resort. Today, our pack was shown a better way, a stronger way." He turned his head slightly, his golden eyes finding mine, a look of profound public reverence in their depths. "Today, your Luna has dispensed her first justice." The word Luna landed with the force of a thunderclap. It was the first time he had named me before them all. The pack stared at me no longer as a stray or a mystery, but as the source of this new, unexpected mercy. Declan's gaze fell upon the broken form of the beta's son. "Rory," he commanded. The boy flinched and was shoved to his feet by the guards. "For 1 year, you are stripped of your name and your rank. You are no longer heir to the house of Liam. You will hold no station but the one I give you now." He paused, letting the weight of the social execution settle. "Your sole duty will be the protection of Niam of the Lowlandkin. You will be her shadow, her shield. You will ensure no harm comes to her from within this pack or without. You will learn that the strength of a wolf is not in what he can take from the weak, but in what he can give to protect them. This is my decree. This is your Luna's justice." It was a sentence of breathtaking brilliance, not of death, but of life, a life of forced service and inescapable empathy. I saw the horror dawn on Rory's face. This was a fate he considered worse than any beating. I saw the complex, agonizing relief on his father's face, and I saw the stunned, terrified hope in Niam's eyes. Then, Declan raised or joined hands high for the entire pack to see, his voice booming with a pride that shook the very rafters. "Behold, Blackridge, your queen."
Chapter 11. A profound, stunned silence followed Declan's declaration. For a heartbeat, the entire pack remained frozen, processing the seismic shift that had just occurred. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me, their expressions a dizzying mix of awe, confusion, and a dawning, fervent respect. The stray who had been struck down just an hour ago was now their queen. Then, as one, they knelt. The sound was a soft, collective rustle of leather and wool, a wave of submission that started at the front and rolled all the way to the back of the hearth hall. Warriors, elders, mothers, and children, the entire Black Ridge pack bowed their heads, not just to their alpha, but to me. The weight of their reverence was a staggering, terrifying thing. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was real. This was my life now. My quiet, unassuming existence was over, replaced by a crown I had never asked for, but now had no choice but to wear. From the corner of my eye, I saw the beta, Liam, take a slow, deliberate step forward. He did not look at his broken son. He walked to the center of the hall and knelt before us, his proud, silver-streaked head bowed low in a gesture of absolute fealty. "My Luna," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble of pure, unadulterated shame and acceptance. "Your justice is wise. My house will see it done." The public declaration sealed Rory's fate and solidified my own. The political power of the Beta's house was now thrown fully behind my first act as Luna. Across the room, I saw the two guards lead a numb, shuffling Rory to where Niam stood, still trembling. He was forced to stand a respectful 10 paces from her, his head down, his posture one of utter defeat. His year of service had begun under the watchful eyes of the entire pack. Declan's hand squeezed mine, a silent signal. The public ceremony was over. He turned, pulling me with him, and led me from the hearth hall, not towards his lonely tor, but towards a different path, one that led to a sprawling, comfortable-looking longhouse nestled in a grove of ancient oaks. "The Alpha's Tor is my fortress," he said, his voice a low, intimate murmur meant only for me as we walked. "But this is our home." He stopped before the door, turning to face me, his golden eyes serious. "What you did in there today, Fiona, was more powerful than any act of violence. You showed them a Luna's heart. But you must understand what that means. You have introduced mercy into a world that has long survived on fear. Not everyone will welcome the change. You have not just punished a boy, you have challenged the very soul of this pack, and our enemies will be watching."
Chapter 12. The Alpha's longhouse was a world away from the cold, stark power of the Tor. Where the Tor was built of stone and solitude, the longhouse was crafted from warm, ancient oak, its heart a great, welcoming hearth that was already blazing cheerfully. The air smelled of beeswax, dried herbs, and home. It was a space designed for a family, for a life. And the realization that this was now my home was a dizzying, terrifying thought. I walked to the hearth, my hands outstretched to the warmth, trying to chase away the bone-deep chill that the judgment stones had left in my soul. I could still feel the weight of 100 kneeling wolves, their fealty a heavy cloak I wasn't sure I was strong enough to wear. Declan didn't press me. He moved to a heavy sideboard and poured 2 glasses of a dark amber liquid, the scent of honeyed mead filling the air. He handed one to me, his fingers brushing mine in a fleeting, gentle touch. He watched me, his golden eyes searching my face, not as an alpha assessing a subject, but as a man trying to understand the woman who had just upended his entire world. "You are troubled," he stated, his voice a low, quiet rumble. "I just became the queen of a people I barely know," I admitted, my voice trembling slightly as I stared into the fire. "I sentenced a boy to a punishment I invented on the spot, and I challenged a law that has stood for centuries. I'm not troubled, Declan. I'm terrified." "What you did was not an invention," he corrected, his tone firm. "It was instinct. A Luna's instinct. You saw a wound in the pack, and you moved to heal it, not to amputate." He took a slow sip of his mead. "But you must understand that a healer's touch can be seen as a weakness by those who only understand the fist." My blood ran cold at his words, the warning from before returning with a new, sharper edge. "Our enemies," I whispered, the word tasting like poison. He gave a grim, sharp nod. "The Red Fang pack on our eastern border, their alpha, Malachi, rules through brutality. He respects only power, and he sees mercy as a flaw to be exploited. He has been testing our borders for months, looking for an opening, a sign of weakness." He paused, his gaze hardening into chips of gold ice. "Today, in his eyes, you did not show them a queen's heart. You showed him a target." Just as the chilling words settled between us, the heavy oak door creaked open. One of Declan's personal guards stood silhouetted in the doorway, his posture rigid with urgency. He held something in his gloved hand. It was a single, black-fletched arrow. "Alpha," the guard said, his voice tight, "found on the eastern patrol route. It was not aimed at our warriors. It was planted in the ancient rowan tree that marks the Luna's glade." Declan's hand tightened around his glass, the thick crystal groaning under the pressure. The message was unmistakable. It wasn't a challenge to his pack or his warriors. It was a direct personal threat aimed squarely and with a deadly precision at me.
Chapter 13. The warmth of the hearth turned to ice. Declan took the arrow from the guard, his movements unnervingly calm. He didn't need to examine the fletching or the sharpened obsidian tip. He knew its creator as well as he knew his own name. The man who had shown me his vulnerable heart just moments ago was gone, consumed entirely by the cold, lethal fury of the Alpha King. His scent filled the room, no longer just wood smoke and power, but the sharp metallic tang of ozone before a lightning strike. "The Luna's glade," he whispered, his voice a low, dangerous sound that promised violence. "A place of life, of new beginnings. He put an instrument of death in its heart." He looked at me, and the raw, possessive fire in his golden eyes was terrifying to behold. This is Malachi's way. He doesn't challenge armies first. He threatens what is most precious. He finds the heart of his enemy and puts a knife to its throat. My own heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. I was the heart. I was the precious thing. The threat was no longer a distant, abstract concept. It was a black-fletched arrow, a promise of my death. A wave of cold, sharp fear washed over me, so potent it made me dizzy. But then something else rose to meet it, a hot, defiant anger. How dare he? How dare this faceless monster threaten me, threaten this pack, threaten this new, fragile life I was just beginning to understand? I would not be a weakness. I would not be a target. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice steady, surprising even myself. Declan's gaze sharpened, a flicker of fierce pride in his eyes at my lack of fear. He turned to the guard. "Send word to the patrols. Double them. I want eyes on every shadow from here to the eastern border. Seal the territory. Nothing gets in or out without my express command." Then he looked back at me, his expression a mask of grim resolve. You will not leave this longhouse. You will not walk the grounds. You will have my two most trusted warriors, Ronan and Cormac, at your door at all times." My newfound defiance bristled at the command. "I will not be a prisoner, Declan." "You will be alive," he snarled, the Alpha's authority returning with the force of a tidal wave. "This is not a negotiation, Fiona. This is a war, and you are the prize." The guard who had been waiting silently cleared his throat, his expression grim. "Alpha," he said, his voice tight with a new urgency. "There is more. The fletching on the arrow, it is from a Black Ridge raven. The sinew that binds it is from a stag hunted in our own woods." Declan went completely still. The implications of the guard's words settled in the room like a death shroud. I saw the dawning, sickening horror on his face. This wasn't just a message sent from across the border. To get those materials, to craft that arrow, to place it so precisely in a secret glade. Malachi didn't just have scouts watching them. He had a traitor living among them. The enemy wasn't just at the gates. They were already inside.
Chapter 14. The guard's words hung in the air, a poison that contaminated the very heart of the longhouse. A traitor. The word was a blade that sliced through the foundations of trust and loyalty Declan had spent a decade building. His rage, which had been a hot, burning thing, instantly cooled into something far more dangerous, a chilling, absolute certainty. The hunt had changed. He was no longer just protecting his borders. He was purging a sickness from within. He dismissed the guard with a flick of his wrist, his movements sharp and economical. The arrow lay on the great oak table between us, a black snake in our home. I stared at it, at the familiar raven's feather, at the sinew from a stag that had likely grazed in these very woods. Anyone could be the enemy. The warrior who served our food, the woman who tended the hearth, the elder who offered a respectful nod. The entire pack, which had just knelt to me in fealty, was now a sea of potential assassins. The fear I felt was no longer a sharp, clean thing. It was a slow, creeping dread that coiled in my gut. "This changes nothing," I said, my voice a quiet, defiant whisper in the heavy silence. I would not let him see my fear. I would not let this invisible enemy break me. Declan's golden eyes, which had been staring at the arrow, snapped up to meet mine. A flicker of something, fierce, possessive pride, burned through his cold fury. "It changes everything," he corrected, his voice a low, dangerous growl. Before, the enemy was at the gate. Now, he is at our table. He walked over to me, his presence a comforting wall of heat and power. He gently took my face in his hands, his thumbs stroking my cheekbones. He wants to sow paranoia, to make me doubt my own people, to turn my pack against my mate. He looked deep into my eyes, and I saw the shift in his strategy, the birth of a new, dangerous plan. "I will not hide you, Fiona. I will do the opposite. I will put you on display. You will be at my side at all times. You will attend every council meeting. You will walk the grounds with me as your shadow. We will show them a bond so strong, so absolute, that it chokes the very air the traitor breathes. We will show them a king and queen so united that no poison can find purchase." My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't a plan for my safety. It was a declaration of war. He was going to use our mating bond as a weapon. "We will find this snake," he whispered, his forehead resting against mine, his voice a raw, intimate vow.
and I will show them and you the justice of a king when his queen has been threatened.
Chapter 15. The next morning, the longhouse felt less like a home and more like the heart of a war room. Declan was true to his word. After a tense, silent breakfast, he took my hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "Stay by my side," he commanded softly. "Let them see you. Let the traitor see you." He led me not to the hearth hall or a quiet glade, but to the one place I expected to be forbidden, the training grounds. It was a vast, muddy field carved from the forest, ringing with the sounds of steel on leather and the guttural roars of sparring warriors. The moment we stepped into the clearing, the chaotic energy ceased. The fighting stopped. 100 sweaty, battle-hardened wolves, their bodies covered in scars and dirt, turned to stare. Their gazes were a physical weight, a mixture of raw curiosity, awe, and from a few shadowed corners, a cold, resentful scrutiny. They weren't just looking at their alpha's new mate. They were looking at the woman who had defied the old law and lived. Declan ignored them all, leading me to a raised wooden platform that overlooked the grounds. He never released my hand. It was a clear, unmistakable gesture of possession and partnership. "Continue," he roared, and the sounds of training resumed, though now it was stilted, self-conscious. Every warrior was acutely aware of the two figures watching them. My eyes scanned the crowd, searching for a face that didn't fit, a look that was out of place. I saw Liam, the beta, standing apart from the other elders. His face was a stony mask, his eyes fixed on the sparring warriors, but I could feel the shame and resentment rolling off him in waves. Was it shame for his son's actions, or resentment towards me for being the cause of his house's disgrace? Then my attention was drawn to a fight in the center of the field. A large, brutish warrior with a cruel scar bisecting his eyebrow was being needlessly vicious with his younger sparring partner. Where others pulled their blows, he landed them with full force, a malicious grin on his face as the younger wolf stumbled and fell. It wasn't training, it was bullying disguised as a lesson. The warrior looked up then, as if sensing my gaze, and his eyes, cold, flat, and reptilian, met mine for a split second. There was no respect in them, only a flicker of contemptuous satisfaction before he turned back to his victim. A chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air went through me. As we turned to leave, Declan leaned in close, his voice a low rumble against my ear. "They see their queen," he murmured, his gaze sweeping the grounds with pride. "Most of them do," I whispered back, my eyes still on the cruel warrior in the distance. "But some of them only see a new target."
Chapter 16. The chill from the training grounds lingered long after we returned to the longhouse. Declan's plan was a high-stakes gamble, a tour of his kingdom designed to expose the rot within. I had seen the pack's muscle. Now it was time to face its mind. That afternoon he led me to the council chambers, an ancient, intimidating room carved deep into the rock beneath the tor. A single, massive table of petrified oak dominated the space, its surface worn smooth by the hands of a dozen generations of alphas. The air was heavy with the weight of history and secrets. The pack's elders were already assembled, a dozen grim-faced wolves, their eyes a mixture of reverence and deep, wary scrutiny. At the head of the table, opposite Declan's seat, sat the beta, Liam. He did not meet my gaze, his face a stony mask of shame. We took our seats, Declan at the head, me at his right hand, our joined hands a silent, unreachable fortress on the table. The meeting began, the topic a single, sharp blade, Malachi. Declan outlined the threat, the arrow, the doubled patrols. He spoke with the cold, hard certainty of a king at war. Then he opened the floor for counsel. An elder named Donal, a traditionalist with eyes like chips of flint, was the first to speak. "Our borders are secure, Alpha," he said, his voice gravelly rasp. "Our warriors are strong. Perhaps the threat is not one of strength, but of perception." His gaze flickered to me for a fraction of a second. "Mercy is a noble virtue, but in the wild it can be misunderstood as weakness. Malachi will see it as such." My blood ran cold. It was a direct, public challenge to my justice. Donald continued, his words a carefully veiled attack. "Men like my nephew, Kalen," he said, and I instantly pictured the cruel warrior from the training grounds, "understand the necessity of a hard hand. They ensure the pack remains sharp, strong." He then turned his full attention to me, his lips curving into a smile that held no warmth, only the cold calculation of a predator. "We are all, of course, concerned for our new Luna's safety," he said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "A rare flower is a beautiful thing, after all, but it is best kept behind high walls, protected from the harshness of the world. The wilderness is no place for something so fragile. It might get trampled underfoot by careless beasts." The words were a direct echo of Malachi's threat. It wasn't just a political jab, it was a signal, a warning. Declan's hand tightened around mine, his knuckles white, a silent promise of the violence he was holding back. The room was deathly quiet. I stared directly at Elder Donal, at the smug reptilian glint in his eyes, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I was looking at the snake in our garden.
Chapter 17. The air in the council chambers was a razor's edge. Donal's words, a perfect echo of Malachi's threat, hung in the silence, a venomous, unspoken accusation. I felt Declan's entire body tense beside me, a low growl building in his chest. He was about to erupt, to rip the mask from the elder and expose him with pure, brute force. But that was the traitor's plan, to provoke him into an act of tyranny, to make him look like a paranoid king attacking a respected elder. My wolf, the quiet, observant part of me, refused to let it happen. I squeezed Declan's hand once, a sharp, silent command to hold. He faltered, his furious golden eyes snapping to mine, stunned by my audacity. I gave him a look that said, "Trust me. Let me handle this." I then turned my full attention to Elder Donal, a slow, thoughtful smile spreading across my face. I made my voice soft, almost fragile, leaning into the role he had just assigned me. "You are right, Elder Donal," I said, my voice a melodic, gentle sound that disarmed the entire room. "Your wisdom is profound. I am new to this world. I am, as you say, a fragile flower." Donal's eyes narrowed, a flicker of confusion in their reptilian depths. He had expected fear or anger, not this placid, sweet agreement. I continued. My voice beamed a note of sincere, calculated concern. "If I am to be a symbol of this pack's heart, then my safety must be a reflection of its strength. And you are right, the best way to protect something precious is to give it the strongest possible guardians." My gaze swept the room before landing back on him, my expression of one of pure, innocent inspiration. "Which is why I believe you, as our wisest and most traditional elder, should personally oversee my protection." The room went completely, utterly still. Donal's smug smile froze on his face. I pressed my advantage, my voice still sweet and reasonable. "And your nephew, Kalen, since he is such a shining example of the pack's strength, he should lead my personal guard. It would be an immense honor for him. What better way to show Malachi our unity than to have the houses of our most respected elders personally sworn to the Luna's protection. It was a perfect, inescapable trap. If Donald refused, he would be publicly admitting his loyalty was a lie. If he accepted, he and his brutish nephew would be my personal shadows, leashed to me, their every move watched. I had taken his threat and twisted it into a chain. I looked at Declan. The raw fury in his eyes had been replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated shock, which quickly melted into a slow, dangerous, and incredibly proud smile. The king had seen the queen make her first move.
Chapter 18. The silence in the council chambers was a drawn breath, every elder stunned by the elegant, deadly simplicity of my move. Donald was trapped, caught in the jaws of his own hypocrisy. A dark, furious flush crept up his neck, but his face was a mask of strained civility. To refuse my request would be an open declaration of treason. To accept was to be leashed. Before the entire council, he had no choice. "Of course, my Luna," he finally managed to choke out, the title tasting like acid on his tongue. "It would be our house's greatest honor to ensure your safety." The words were a vow of loyalty, but his cold, reptilian eyes were a promise of murder. The game was set. Declan stood, his chair scraping against the stone floor, the sound a clear dismissal. He kept my hand firmly in his as we walked from the chamber, leaving behind a council of elders who were looking at me with a new, profound, and terrified respect. The moment the heavy doors closed behind us, cutting us off from the world, Declan pulled me to a stop. He backed me against the cold stone wall of the corridor, his body caging mine, his golden eyes blazing with an emotion so fierce it stole the breath from my lungs. It wasn't anger. It was pure, unadulterated awe. "You magnificent, terrifying creature," he breathed, his voice a raw, reverent whisper. He rested his forehead against mine, his other hand coming up to cut my jaw. I was ready to tear him apart, to rip the truth from his throat and hang him from the tor for every wolf to see. He shook his head, a low, incredulous laugh rumbling in his chest. "And you gutted him with a smile and a sweet word. You turned his own poison against him and made him drink it." The intensity of his pride, his sheer adoration, was a more potent force than his rage had ever been. He wasn't just my mate, my protector. In that moment, he became my partner. He saw me, all of me, not as a weakness to be sheltered, but as a different kind of strength, a coming that perfectly balanced his own brute force. Later that day, the new guard was posted. Kalen, his face a thundercloud of resentment, stood at attention outside the longhouse door. His cruel eyes were fixed on the ground, refusing to look at me. "Kalen," I said, my voice calm and clear. He flinched, forced to meet my gaze. "My first order of business is a tour of the lower pens, where the Omegas mended the hunting gear. You will escort me. I wish to learn the names of every wolf who serves this pack, starting with those who are often forgotten." His jaw tightened, the humiliation of the order a fresh wound. He had to guard me while I honored the very people he despised. With a clipped, resentful nod, he turned to lead the way. I had the snake on a leash now, but the leash was short and its fangs were sharp. The danger was no longer at the border. It was walking right beside me.
Chapter 19. The walk to the Omega Pens was a silent, suffocating journey. Kalen led the way, his broad back a rigid wall of resentment. Every step he took was heavy with a humiliation that was almost a physical force. The pack members we passed stopped and stared, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and wonder. They saw their new Luna, the one who had calmed Alpha's wrath, being escorted by the very wolf who represented the old guard's cruelty. They saw a changing of the tides. The pens were a series of low, drafty workshops at the very edge of the settlement, tucked away where the scent of oiled leather and mending hides wouldn't bother the higher-ranking pack members. It was a place of forgotten wolves. The moment we entered, a hush fell over the dozen or so Omegas working within. They shrank back, their heads bowed, their eyes avoiding Kalen's thunderous presence. Their fear was a familiar, ingrained thing. "Luna," one of the older women whispered, her voice trembling, as she gave a shaky bow. I ignored Kalen completely, my focus entirely on the people before me. I walked over to the woman, offering her a gentle smile. "Please, there's no need for that. I am Fiona. I've come to see the work you do. The pack cannot hunt without the gear you mend." My words, a simple acknowledgement of their value, seemed to stun them more than any command could have. Slowly, hesitantly, they began to show me their work, mending torn leather, fletching arrows, sharpening hunting blades. My gaze landed on a small figure in the corner, her hands busy, but her eyes fixed on me with a look of pure, unadulterated awe. It was Neve. I walked over to her, Kalen's resentful presence a heavy shadow at my back. Neve was working on a beautiful, ornate leather bracer, the kind only a high-ranking warrior would wear. The intricate stitching was nearly complete. "That is beautiful work, Neve," I said softly. She flushed, her fingers tracing the pattern. "It is for the Alpha, for the midwinter hunt." My eyes scanned the craftsmanship, but then I saw it. A single, almost invisible flaw. One of the main straps, the one designed to take the most strain, hadn't been reinforced with sinew. It was held by a single, thin, leather thong, cleverly disguised. In the heat of a hunt, during a struggle, it would snap. And Alpha, expecting his bracer to hold, would be left exposed at the worst possible moment. It was not an oversight. It was sabotage, as subtle and as deadly as the serpent's bite. I picked it up, my fingers tracing the weak point. I didn't look at Neve. I looked over my shoulder, directly into Kalen's cold, contemptuous eyes. Such a shame for such a beautiful piece to have such a fatal flaw.
Chapter 20. Kalen's face, which had been a mask of sullen resentment, went unnervingly still. A flicker of panic, cold and sharp, flashed in his reptilian eyes before being immediately smothered by a sneer of pure contempt. He took a threatening step forward, his large frame towering over me, trying to use his physical dominance to regain control of the situation. "It's an Omega's mistake," he growled, his voice a low, dangerous rumble meant to intimidate. "They are clumsy creatures. What would a woman like you know of a warrior's gear anyway?" He reached for the bracer, intending to snatch it away and hide the evidence. I didn't let him. I held it fast, my gaze unwavering. "I know that a single, weak stitch can bring down the strongest wolf," I said, my voice quiet but carrying the cold weight of a final judgment. "A mistake like this isn't clumsy, it's treason." The word, spoken aloud in the sudden tomb-like silence of the workshop, was a spark in a tinderbox. Kalen's facade of contempt shattered, revealing the cornered, rabid animal beneath. His hand shot out, not for the bracer, but for me. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my flesh like talons. The Omegas cried out, scrambling backwards in terror. 9 was a frozen statue of fear. "You should have stayed behind your walls, little flower," he hissed, his face inches from mine, his breath foul with malice. "You were warned. Now you'll see what happens when strays stick their noses where they don't belong." He was going to hurt me. He was going to make it look like an accident, an overzealous guard silencing a hysterical Luna. It was the only move he had left. "I believe," a voice said, so cold and so quiet it seemed to freeze the very air. You are forgetting your place." Declan stood in the doorway of the pen, a figure of absolute, deathly calm. He wasn't raging, he wasn't roaring, he was something far worse. He was a king who had just watched a traitor lay hands on his queen. His golden eyes were not blazing, they were flat, devoid of all emotion save a chilling, lethal certainty. Kalen's hand dropped from my arm, as if he had been burned. He stumbled back, his face draining of all color, a pathetic, strangled sound catching in his throat. Declan didn't even look at him at first. His gaze was fixed on the bracer in my hand. He walked over, took it from me, and his thumb traced the deliberately weakened strap. The cold understanding that dawned on his face was a terrifying thing to behold. He finally looked at Kalen, and the predator that lived beneath the king's skin looked out. "You were right, my Luna," Declan said, his voice a soft, silken promise of annihilation. He looked at Kalen. "It is treason." He gave a single, sharp nod to the two guards who had appeared at his back. "Take him to the Tor, and bring me his uncle. The Elder Council will convene tonight, not for a trial, for a sentencing."
Chapter 21. The air in the Alpha's Tor was cold enough to steal the breath from your lungs. It was a place of judgment, not mercy. Kalen and his uncle, the elder Donal, were forced to kneel on the cold stone floor before the empty hearth. The rest of the Elder Council, including a humbled and resolute Beta Liam, stood as silent witnesses along the walls. This was not a trial. It was a final, undeniable reckoning. Declan stood before them, a king of stone and shadow, the sabotaged bracer held loosely in his hand. He tossed it onto the floor before Donal. It landed with a soft, damning thud. "Your house was given the honor of protecting the Luna," Declan said, his voice a low, chilling whisper that was more terrifying than any roar. "Instead, you used that honor to plot my death and threaten my mate. You sought to align yourself with Malachi, to sell this pack for a taste of power." Donal, ever the politician, tried to spin his web of lies one last time. "Alpha, it was the boy," he pleaded, gesturing to his nephew. "Kalen is rash, arrogant. He acted alone, driven by foolish pride." "He acted on your orders," I said, my voice cutting through his pathetic excuses like a blade. All eyes turned to me. I stepped forward from the shadows to stand beside Declan, no longer his shield, but his partner in judgment. I looked down at the cowering elder. "You whispered your poison into his ear. You saw my mercy towards Rory not as strength, but as a weakness you could exploit. You misjudged me, you misjudged your alpha, and you misjudged this pack." I walked over to the great dust-streaked window that overlooked the entire Blackridge. The strength of a pack is not in its cruelty, it is in its heart. A heart you tried to cut out. I turned back, my gaze meeting Declan's. I saw the question in his eyes, the silent offering of this final judgment. It was mine to make. "The old law demands your souls," I stated, my voice clear and cold. "But to unmake you would be to use the same dark magic you yourselves embraced. The Blackridge pack is a pack of honor, not of shadows." I took a deep breath. My decision absolute. You will not be unmade. You will be cast out. You will be stripped of your name, your rank, your very connection to this pack. You will walk from this Tor as nameless things, and will never again set foot on Blackridge lands. If you are ever seen again, the sentence is death. This is the justice of your Luna." It was the ultimate punishment. Not a quick death, but a long, slow erasure. Banishment. Later that night, after the two traitors had been marched to the border and cast into the wilderness, Declan and I stood alone on the high balcony of the Tor. The wind was cold, but he was a warm, solid presence behind me, his arms wrapped securely around my waist. The lights of the settlement below glowed like a constellation of loyal, trusting stars. "You are the heart of this pack, Fiona, fierce and merciful. You are its strength." I leaned back into him, into my home, my mate, my king. "And you," I whispered, turning to meet his gaze, my hand coming up to cup his jaw, "are mine." The storm had passed. The rot was purged, and under the watchful eyes of the moon, our reign had truly begun.